We have been studying Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, and in particular, the present focus is on the description by the Kena of mind of our mind. In verse 5, it declares, "That which thinks not by the mind, that by which the mind is thought, know that to be the Brahman, and not this which men follow after here." This mind of our mind is a power of cognition, which is the very opposite of the mind's functioning. Therefore, mind is unable to know it, but mind itself can exist because that power exists and it forms the mind as one of its instruments. That power, which Sri Aurobindo calls the supermind, is referred to in the Veda as the truth, the right, the vast, Satyam, Ritam, Brihat, Mahas. All of these terms are referring to a power of cognition which is so different from mind that mind is unable to know it. Itself does not need mind to cognize. And it is towards this that the Kena Upanishad is leading us when it says, "Know that to be the Brahman." The means for attaining to this is, Sri Aurobindo said in the portion we read last time, the constant preparation of the mind by the admission into it of a working higher than itself, until the mind is capable of giving itself up to the supramental action which exceeds it and which will finally replace it. Such is the direction of our further evolution. And Sri Aurobindo puts this in the context of the past stages of evolution. Mind also, he says, has to follow the law of natural progression. And just as the life consciousness, which is beyond the material being, unable to be attained by it, had to prepare matter for its expression and organized manifestation, in the same way, life itself had to be prepared by mind, which was unable for it to attain, And in the same pattern, our mind has to be prepared by that which is beyond mind, in order that that may organize the mind, prepare it for its manifestation. But then we come to the text where we paused last time. All of this, something preparing something else, something being transformed by something else, shows us a sense of continuity of things. Life and matter, although we say they're distinct, matter cannot express as life spontaneously, yet life is able to prepare matter for expressing itself in it. All of these suggest some kind of a continuity, even in the appearance of distinct grades. And so Sri Aurobindo steps back to give us the deeper truth behind which makes possible this kind of an evolutionary movement. In recognizing this deeper truth, we see what actually is happening when these new stages are organized and expressed. It's one thing to say that yes, life prepared matter and therefore it could express itself in matter. But what was it that life prepared in matter? What was it in the expression of matter which was not there, which life made possible? And in what way has life fulfilled matter? This is understood only when we step back to look at the deeper truth of this evolutionary movement. And this he now describes. And all this progression is possible because these things are only different formations of one being and one consciousness. So straight away, we are shown a deeper underlying unity, which is behind all these stages of the progression and which makes possible all these interactions and emergences of evolution. They're possible because these things are only different formations of one being and one consciousness. Because there is one being of which these are special formations, these different formations can interact with each other. Because there is one consciousness which is behind them, therefore the consciousness of one can enter in relation with the consciousness of the other. It's a very deep insight, and its implications are enormous. It can change our whole thinking and our perspective of the universe. That two things cannot enter in relation unless there is something essential common to both. If you take two different objects, here I have water and here I have air, and I try to get the air to meet the water, to mix with it. You can try all you want, blow bubbles in the water, somehow the air will tend to separate. You cannot get them to mix and remain mixed easily. And yet they're able to enter in relation with each other because there is something common which makes possible that air touches water. But the difference is large enough that although there is an interaction, there cannot be a continuity of contact. On the other hand, if you take the water and radio waves, the radio waves pass right through. They pass right through our hands. We can try to touch all we want, we are unable to touch radio waves. Why? Because they are too different. You take a piece of metal, curl it into a wire, change its arrangement and shape in such a way that within the wire, a very subtle influence of the radio waves is now built up and amplified, and you have a radio, and you can listen to the radio wave. Why? Because the radio wave has a very light interaction with the metal. If it did not, it would pass right through and nothing would be possible to connect, to create a relationship. All things in the universe can enter in relation because behind there is one underlying reality, one being, one consciousness. This has implications for many other things in the current speculations of physics. cosmologists try to understand the nature of the universe. And one of the theories which they come up with is perhaps this is one universe out of many universes. And it's possible, perhaps. But if we take the logic a step further and we conceive of two universes, we could ask, what is it that separates them? And if there is something which separates them in distinction completely, that these two universes can never meet, that means the origin is two different things. But if the thing which separates is only a superficial separation and eventually the two universes have to enter in contact, then it means they have something in common which underlies and there is one origin. If we conceive of two different origins, the very idea that there are two different origins leads us to the underlying reality in which these two origins can exist, and therefore that becomes the ultimate reality uniting. And so by a very simple process of thought, we realize ultimately there has to be one underlying reality, otherwise we couldn't even conceive of two different universes. And if there is one underlying reality which expresses as two universes, however different they may be, there will be some subtle nature of interaction from one to the other. And therefore they are not two universes. They are perhaps two different grades of universe. They are one universe having two different grades. Inevitably, by such a process of thought and deeper understanding, one comes to the conclusion there cannot be other than one reality. You cannot have two realities. You cannot have two underlying principles. There has to be one ultimately, and which then unifies all this. Therefore, there is only one universe, perhaps many facets, aspects, gradations of the one universe, but there has to be only one. And therefore, anything in the one universe can enter in relation with everything else, less or more, because the underlying reality is one, being is one, consciousness is one. And this is what he is getting to. In a very simple statement, all this progression is possible because these things are only different formations of one being and one consciousness. Matter, life, mind, and even supermind are different formations of one being and one consciousness. In matter, this formation, this one consciousness concentrates itself on a certain aspect of form, the principle of form and fixity of form. You will recall this was described in the study which we made of Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Isha Upanishad, where he discusses the different levels of existence, and he describes how these levels are experienced by the soul. So I read from there, from the commentary on the Isha Upanishad. Sri Aurobindo says, Atman, the self, represents itself differently in the sevenfold movement of nature according to the dominant principle of the consciousness in the individual being. In the physical consciousness, Atman becomes the material being. In the vital or nervous consciousness, Atman becomes the vital or dynamic being. In the mental consciousness, it becomes the mental being. In the supra-intellectual consciousness, dominated by the truth or the causal idea, Atman becomes the ideal being or the great soul. And so on. He goes on with the other three, which I skip. But then he says, he describes what happens when the soul looks through each of these levels. In the consciousness of the soul, I do not have the text immediately. In the consciousness, when the soul enters and identifies with matter, it experiences world and itself as forms and domain of forms. When it identifies with life energy in the vital consciousness, it experiences all things as energies, flow and force of energies. In the domain of mind, it experiences itself and everything as made of ideas, and idea interchanging, moving, and relating to idea in mental substance. In supermind, it knows itself as knowledge, which is one, and power, which is one, omniscience, omnipotence. It knows oneness, it knows also multiplicity. And all of these different stations are as if distinct formations of the one being, one consciousness. Because there is this underlying one being and one consciousness, life can enter in relation with matter. Matter can enter in relation with life. At first, there is in matter a kind of an urge, a push from deep within it to try to express its own inner possibilities, which is a secret, hidden, sleeping life force. As far as it can go, it is able to organize and express itself. We see this in the most material processes of crystal formation, where somehow molecules are arranged to become these perfect shapes. But to go beyond that, to become living matter where life overrides material limitations, is not possible for matter. And this is where life energy begins to enter into matter. And although the two are very different and the influence of one upon the other is very fine, through that fine influence, it begins gradually to work on matter, softening it, rearranging it, until it is able to create a structure that is more and more intensely responsive to its influence. The same way as we took a piece of metal, shaped it into a wire, coiled it, and arranged it in a way that it began to resonate more and more intensely to the radio waves, which otherwise might pass right through. And so life has organized a structure which is more responsive to it. And then through it now it begins to build its new forms until it can create a form where life power dominates over matter. And now you have a living being. And in the living being, things impossible to matter by itself are being expressed and organized by life force. In the same way, mind worked on matter. At first, mind had nothing in common with matter and life energy, a very faint, subtle influence. But it picked on those, and as far as life and mind could go, life and matter could go, they stopped. But it picked on that point of contact as far as life could go. And it built there some possibilities. We discussed this last time in the nervous system. Something responsive to mind has been organized. And the more refined, the more developed that, the more effective the influence of mind in it, in the body, and in the brain and nervous system. And through it, mind can seize on these things, shape them, and organize them in its terms so that in the human consciousness, mind is able to override life processes and even override material processes. And this is why we find sometimes these seemingly what we would call miraculous results, that simply in changing the way you think, or by an influence which affects only the thought process, an entire physical disability is overcome. An illness is cured, sometimes even overnight. And this is possible because mind has this ability to overwhelm the life processes and the material processes. This is the principle of what we call the placebo effect. There's an interesting book which I just came across titled, "You Are the Placebo." Meaning, you as mind are the one who can change the body and life processes because you believe. And this is the nature of the placebo effect, that somebody who is sick is given a sugar pill which has no physical medicinal content, but he is told that this is a medicine powerful which can cure your illness. And on taking the sugar pill, the person actually finds the symptoms rapidly vanishing. And you wonder, how is it that something which has no medicinal value can produce the same effect as another material which has medicinal value? In fact, in modern medicinal tests, one has to compensate for the placebo. One has to assume the very fact that someone accepts to participate in a test, there will be a placebo effect. They believe that they are being given good medicine and it will have an effect. And you have to compensate for it to recognize whether a medicine is actually effective by its physical process or not. But if this placebo effect is so powerful, why not we rely on it? Why not we build on the truth behind it, which is that mind can override life processes and physical processes. And by therefore consciously cultivating in our mind a deep conviction, we can imprint. And this would be the true nature of the human mentality, separating itself from life and matter and organizing in life and matter its truths. That's when we can claim we are truly mental beings. But the same process now also happens in the action of the supermind. There is right now practically nothing in us which responds to that, because that is so different and this is so different. And yet something, a very subtle influence somewhere is existing in the part of the mind which struggles to rise and open itself to higher things and receives influences of the higher consciousness. And in that part, a tiny tail end of the supramental influence can begin to make gentle ripples, gentle movements, gentle organizational influences by which it can create a space in which more and more directly its influence can come on us. Now you will notice in each of these steps, the higher is able to tap into something of the lower, which to the lower is something extremely essential, not normal to its functioning, but deep within as an essential potential. And Sri Aurobindo now refers to this in what actually happens in the evolutionary steps. He says, life only reveals in matter that which is involved in matter, that which is the secret meaning and essence of matter. In other words, we see matter expressing itself in its characteristic form. But there is an essential truth of matter. There is a secret meaning within matter that remains secret, that remains essential. What life does is to tap that and draw that out. Otherwise, matter by itself is lost in its characteristic tendencies. The same with life. He says, first, it reveals, as it were, to material existence its own soul, its own end. So too, mind reveals in life all that life means, all that it obscurely is in essence, and cannot realize because it is absorbed in its own practical motion and its own characteristic form. So if you look at the organizations of life in nature, in plant, and perhaps even in the early animals, you will find life is struggling to express its through its normal rhythms, normal tendencies. But what is it that life holds in its potential that mind enters and releases? It is only as mind begins to enter in life that life can come into its own and express its higher possibilities. So also, supermind must intervene to reveal mind to itself, to liberate it from its absorption in its own practical motion and characteristic form, and enable the mental being to realize that which is the hidden secret of all its formal practice and action. If you look at the normal working of the human mind, what do we apply it towards? Improving quality of life, improving our conveniences and comforts, and organizing possibilities, making more efficient, making more perfect what already exists or what is needed for our survival. But is that all? Is that all that mind is intended to do? And if we try to feel what we may call the soul of mind, the essence of mind, what is it that we sense there? Ideals. Ideals which are impossible, which have never been realized in all of human history, and yet which continue somewhere deep within us to nudge, to poke, to point to a possibility which is greater, but which, when mind tries to actualize, it finds unable to. We all dream of an ideal society. And for the last perhaps several thousands of years or more, all over the earth, we have tried to organize these ideal societies, ideal communities, small or big, narrow or diverse, it does not matter. We have tried. And every time, inevitably, after a brief, beautiful expression, it has subsided, failed. Nothing has been achieved which has been able to last. Just this could be for us a conclusion that ideals are impossible. They are unreal. And we use these terms, figment of imagination, utopian, idealistic, to say something which cannot be. Although it looks nice, it looks possible. But the reality is that through all these struggles, something has been prepared in the human mental consciousness. That increasingly, some part of our mind has grown familiar with the possibility of the ideal, which feels vividly the hope of their realization, but is unable to by mind's own characteristic way. But in that part where now it is a living possibility, the supermind can begin to exercise its influence, touch those parts, mold and organize them, and through them make possible what mind could not do on its own. And therefore, he says, supermind must intervene to reveal mind to itself, to liberate it from its absorption in its own practical motion and characteristic form, and enable the mental being to realize that which is the hidden secret of all its formal practice and action. We are lost in the forms, in the activities of the mind's creations. And the ideal is held at a level which is not form. The moment you try to bring it into form, it gets dulled because mind only knows to create forms the way it knows them, by its characteristic action, which is what? Organize, impose, create structure. And the ideal, remember, the way we feel it, is free. It's spontaneous. It is a living truth at each moment. It's different. It never repeats itself. It is never boring. It is always fresh, inspired, a living force. But when you bring it into the organization of human life, you realize on a practical level, we have limited resources, we have limited food, we have to synchronize with the rhythms of nature, with the rhythms of other human activities, and so we have to organize our community, we have to organize our life, and in the very act of its organization, it dulls, reduces, mechanizes, destroys spontaneity, suffocates freedom, and the ideal withers. Notice the problem was not in the intention of the mind, but in the incapacity of the mental consciousness to be able to give true form to what the ideal needed. So mind, he observes, is lost in absorption in its own practical motion and characteristic form. It's unable to realize the hidden secret of its own possibilities. And that is where supermind must intervene to reveal mind to itself, to liberate it from its absorption, and to realize that which is the hidden secret. And with the influence of the supermind, what mind feels as ideals, now apparently impossible, become possible. Because the principle for organizing those ideals, and yes, they must be organized. The principle is possible only in a consciousness which is itself spontaneous and not mechanical, not rigid, not imposing its limited, narrow structure. It can be a structure which is free flowing, spontaneous at each moment, and yet able to synchronize spontaneously all its activities in the greatest extremes. Mind cannot do that. It needs a consciousness which knows all things which are part of it as itself. And therefore, at each moment, one part is in perfect harmony with all other parts because it knows them intimately. And therefore, even as each part has its needs and is freely exercising its choice, all other parts in their freedom are able to synchronize to allow for the freedom of others as well as to exercise and enjoy their own freedom without ever entering in conflict or in disharmony. Only a consciousness which can know all in an inner unity can organize something like this. This kind of a free-flowing, fluid organization, mind as it thinks will not even call organization. It will call it chaos, or perhaps if it sees that there is something to it, it may say anarchy. And Sri Aurobindo actually uses this term divine anarchy, because it is anarchic to the mind, because mind can only know imposed, fixed, rigid orders. But a free flowing, it cannot grasp as an order. And yet there is an anarchy, and yet there is an order, a harmony, and therefore a divine anarchy. Such is the direction in which the ideal can be fulfilled, but only by a consciousness which can do this. And when that consciousness settles in the mind, it can use the powers of the mind, even illumine those and transform those powers and work through them. In fact, we digress, but we understand more deeply this transition. If you observe the way human life is moving today in its collective organization, at the cutting edge, at its highest, you will see exactly this happening. Recognizing mind's limitations, we have as if been led to create structures, systems, organizations which, although using means of the mind, are able to organize something which is greater than mind. In the way the mother had described it, she said, when the supramental consciousness begins to work more and more directly, there will be spontaneous alignment of things. You will want to, for example, travel from here to another city. You will step out of the house and there will be a taxi passing by which will be empty and it will stop for you. It will be in perfect spontaneity of synchronization. And as you will reach where you are going, the traffic, each one following his own way, will be in perfect harmony, in synchronicity with each other. Notice how today with technology, we're actually working to make this possible. On the mobile phone, we have a whole system of organization behind, sitting in servers in the cloud, somewhere on the earth. We make a request. I wish to travel on this day at this time. And somewhere this searches all the other people who are traveling and finds out, oh, here's a person who's traveling at that time on your route, puts me in touch with them, and the arrangements are made, everything is organized. The spontaneity with which it happens is formed by certain processes of the mind organizing themselves in matter. But mind itself, individual mind, is unable to do, but through the machinery, a mechanical organization, we have as if amplified the possibilities of the mind to be able to handle all the knowledge of the earth's human processes, to find in them the necessary synchronization required and bring them together spontaneously. Without ever stepping out of our house, we can buy what we need from wherever on earth. We can enter in contact with anybody and organize our thoughts, interests, activities, and everything spontaneously falling into place. And these are, we may say, tools or instruments that the supramental consciousness is organizing in the earth, in human current living. They are gifts of the supramental consciousness. It involved two things. It involved a change in the thinking of human beings that would allow this kind of a trust and synchronization. It involved, on the other hand, the creation of tools and means in the material process that could enable this possibility. When, for example, you make a booking online, you make a payment online, you share a taxi as you travel online, you do not know who it is you are meeting. They may be strangers, they may be thieves, they may be murderers. How would you know? There was a time, perhaps 30 years ago or 40 years ago, you would find this dangerous, risky. And yet our thinking has changed. We have learned to trust. And we have created mechanisms also to ensure that the trust is protected. There is a way by which you can give marks to a person with whom you have traveled and say how satisfied you were. And all of these things are piled up for others to know. And these are all material organizational means, but under influence of something which holds a wider, freer, uniting consciousness. And because that acts in our mind, we are able to trust and open out to these possibilities. In the same way, you will notice, before 1956, the mindset of humanity was always to protect self-interest at the highest of national self-interest. But after 1956, as the supramental influence has been growing on the earth, we've begun to feel ourselves as citizens of the earth. We feel ourselves global people. Although we have a nationality, the nationality is subsumed to the larger collective human identity. And perhaps in some even we feel we do not just belong to the earth, we belong to the whole universe. And all of these changes have happened not because we tried, but in spite of us, by the persistent influence of the supramental consciousness, which has been molding the mind of humanity, beginning with the higher aspiring parts of the mind, and then going through and organizing these, including life processes and material processes, and the power of the mind. The creation of the internet is so typical, its character is so typical of the working of the supermind. There is no one center, all are equally part of the network, spread out. And you do not care where you are in the network, each one has the same access, the same connection with the whole. And this was as if a framework, a foundation on which all the rest of the superstructures of organizational possibilities have been built up. We do not even notice. We have learned to trust, and the possibilities continue to develop and are refined. But while this is expressed in the external organization, the same thing is happening within us in the powers of our mind. Our mind is being taught to think differently. You notice in the younger generations, we are no more interested in narrow specializations. If somebody is told, you must do only this and specialize in it for the rest of your life, the child rebels. The child wants to experiment with everything. Even in their specializations, they're always filling with aspects of specialization which go beyond connecting with the whole. All of the greatest discoveries are taking place in interdisciplinary fields, where two specializations meet and where a narrow opens out to the all. In knowledge, in skill, in exploration, everywhere there is the need to be able to reach out to know all and then to choose freely your own area of focus, but with the backdrop of the all. And these tendencies are actually being organized and provoked, guided by the supramental influence on the human mind. The rapidity with which these changes have taken place are astounding. When we only look back at what we were 5 years ago, the way we related to the world, It has changed radically, sometimes by the support of an external influence like the mobile phone or the internet or some device. But still, through that, we now relate to things as if they are all there available instantly. It's only when we get cut off, the internet breaks down, your mobile link is gone, that you suddenly realize you are this small, narrow, helpless person, unable to do what you want to do. And the moment the link comes back, you're again reconnected and everything is possible, everything is within reach. These are experiences which are actually helping to mold the mind, and the human mind, thus molded, further wants to explore and develop these experiences. The further steps in the direction of these experiences will be even more remarkable. What we have so far touched is only a small beginning. All of this the mother had anticipated and described in some of her classes in the 1950s when she was with children. I've mentioned before, but I will repeat here. She spoke of how the present system of money is already obsolete. And in future, you will find people will not need to carry money. And she describes the present credit card or debit card system. Even she describes something which goes beyond the current card system, where she says, the words go something like this. I recall what I had read maybe 20 years ago. She says something like, a method will be found by which, when you make a transaction, there will be no exchange of money here, but in one centralized place, the number will be debited or credited. And they will find a way to connect you with that centralized place. Now remember, in the 50s, if you thought of this description, it made no sense. It seemed impossible. If at all it could be possible to very expensive, very costly machines and techniques, we could never imagine that in our pocket we would carry a little device which allows us to do all this instantly and never have to touch money. Even the credit card is now being gradually removed. In the very next few 2 or 3 years, you will find the credit card being replaced by the mobile phone itself, and even the possibility that the mobile phone replaced by simply your fingerprint or your iris. So when you have to make a cash transaction, you stick your finger, it recognizes the fingerprint, the amount is transferred in the background, and that's it. The concept of money as a means of exchange is becoming more and more abstracted. But where is this taking place? Somewhere, and we don't even know where. And what the supramental consciousness has done through all this is to free us from the entanglement with the tokens and the forms, and to bring in the consciousness more and more directly its character. And there will come a point where even this will be abstracted. The money exchanged there in some cloud itself becomes irrelevant. After all, we are all part of one big cloud of human beings. I give you what you need, you give me what I need, or someone else gives me what we need. And there's a kind of a free-flowing barter system where everybody takes what they need and gives what they don't need, and somehow the whole thing is balanced out. Is that possible? And in fact, such experiments are already taking place in many parts in the world, and with reasonable possibility of success. One of the most important centers for developing new such forms is Auroville. And the mother created Auroville for this purpose, as a focal point where the forms for the future organization of life can be developed. And they have to be developed because they don't exist. They do not exist because the consciousness is still in the domain of the current intellectual incapacity. And it is only as it opens to higher possibilities that new forms corresponding to those new levels of consciousness can begin to be expressed. And it needs to be done somewhere before it can ripple out in humanity. And so all of this we hold at the back of our mind when we read this line where Sri Aurobindo says very simply, so also supermind must intervene to reveal mind to itself, to liberate it from its absorption in its own practical motion and characteristic form, and enable the mental being to realize that which is the hidden secret of all its formal practice and action. All the forms of the mind organization have behind them a deeper truth, a deeper secret, of which these forms are representations. But for mind, the representations and their means lock you in, and you're stuck, you're bound. And these have to be liberated, and the inner possibilities and truth of the soul of mind similarly comes forward. And the result, thus shall man come to the knowledge of that which rules within him, and missions his mind to its mark, sends forth his speech, impels the life force in its paths, and sets his senses to their workings. So this is the reconnecting us to the very first verse of the Kena. But first the idea, thus man shall come to the knowledge of that which rules within him. And throughout in the text of the Kena Upanishad, it has been pointing us to that deeper reality which is within us, supporting all of our formal, superficial life experience. And by this process of opening step by step to that which is behind all of our surface life, we awaken to it. And that's why when mind opens to supermind, and when influence of supermind can recast mind and awaken it to its own truth, thus shall man come to the knowledge of that which rules within him. Because secretly, even now, it is supermind which forms mind, guides mind, sets it in its motion, and therefore rules mind. It is supermind behind which sets forth our impulse of speech, and which we have studied before, sets forth and impels the life force and holds and guides it to be able to express things which are otherwise impossible, and sets the senses to their working. Even in our action of seeing, there is only process of seeing that we see. Light striking my eye, converting to electricity, moving around in the brain cells. But where is the seeing? Nowhere in these. The seeing takes place in the consciousness behind, in which that which is seen is known and recognized for what it is. It is from there that the impulse to express emerges, and that impulse therefore reflects in the mind, in the heart, and rises to form the speech, which is then the superficial expression of the impulse. It is from there that the life forms are seen in their right relation to the whole universe, and the rhythms set by which life can organize and express itself, not only individually, but in the totality of the universal life. And it is from there that the mind is set to its mark. Remember, the very first verse of the Kena asked, by whom missioned falls the mind shot to its mark? By whom yoked moves the first life breath forward on its paths? By whom impelled is this word that men speak? What God set eye and ear to their workings? And the answer always has been that which is hearing of our hearing, mind of our mind, speech of our speech, that too is life of our life breath and sight of our sight. And then repeatedly in all the verses we have seen subsequently, know that to be the Brahman, and not this which men follow after here. And in this way, in the whole evolutionary ascent from matter to life to mind, and thence opening to supermind, we know that as Brahman. And the whole ascending movement of evolution is completed, and the divine consciousness now can manifest through supermind, in life, in matter. And in each of these, revealing their essential truths, the soul of mind, soul of life, soul of matter. You notice in the very usage of this phrase, which Sri Aurobindo has put here so suggestively, when it says, it reveals, as it were, to material existence its own soul, its own end. And the same way he says, so too mind reveals in life all that life means, and supermind must intervene to reveal mind to itself. And in all these, there's a very deep suggestion, although the vocabulary is not here at all. Just the word soul points to it. That in the essence of mind is the truth which mind has to manifest. In the essence of life, in its divine essence, is the truth life has to manifest. In the divine essence of matter is the truth that matter has to manifest. That essence, Sri Aurobindo has referred to as the psychic being, the psychic principle, the psychic consciousness. And it is that which has to manifest. It is that which comes forward more and more with the action of the supermind organizing and revealing itself and liberating from limitations the mind, the life, and the matter. And therefore, in this very simple formulation, although not directly referring to the psychic being, the principle and the process of its emergence and its expression in evolution has been pointed to. And we move to the next paragraph. He has now set us this big picture of evolution, described the underlying principles and possibilities, and what actually is happening as there is this unfoldment emerging. And now the focus comes to what is this principle, supreme cognitive principle, mind of our mind, which is supermind. How does it relate with mind? We must understand how it influences mind's working and makes possible mind's working. But we must also understand how it is fundamentally different from mind's working and why mind is therefore unable to know it. And this is the description in this paragraph, of which we will read a short portion just to set the background, and we will elaborate upon next Sunday. He writes, this supreme cognitive principle does not think by the mind. Mind is to it an inferior and secondary action, not its own proper mode. For mind, based on limitation and division, can act only from a given center in the lower and obscured existence. But supermind is founded on unity, and it comprehends and pervades. Its action is in the universal and is in conscious communion with a transcendent source, eternal and beyond the formations of the universe. Supermind regards the individual in the universal and does not begin with him or make him a separate being. It starts from the transcendent and sees the universal and individual as they are in relation to it, as its terms, as its formulas. It does not start from the individual and universal to arrive at the transcendent. So he has shown us now the two differences of approach, of starting point. But then the implication, mind acquires knowledge and mastery. It reaches by constant mentalizing and willing. Supermind possesses knowledge and mastery. Possessing, it throws itself out freely in various willings and knowings. Mind gropes by divided sensation. It arrives at a sort of oneness through sympathy. Supermind possesses by free and all-embracing sense. It lives in the unity, of which various love and sympathy are only a secondary play of manifestation. Supermind starts from the whole and sees in it its parts and properties. It does not build up knowledge of the whole by an increasing knowledge of the parts and properties, like the mind. And even the whole is to it only a unity of sum, only a partial and inferior term of the higher unity of infinite essence. And with this, he has given a quick summary of the two. We will elaborate on this with examples as we proceed. But the point, therefore, having seen these two like this, he concludes, We see then that these two cognitive principles start from two opposite poles and act in opposite directions by opposite methods. Yet it is by the higher cognitive that the lower is formed and governed. Mind is thought out by that which is beyond mind. So, this is the big picture, the relationship set between supermind and mind. And now we see in detail the different facets and aspects of this relationship. The first thing we see is that mind acts from a station which has unity, which possesses already. Supermind acts from a station which has unity and which possesses already. Mind, on the other hand, begins from incapacity, insufficiency, fragmentation. And therefore, it must begin to accumulate pieces below. And then try to come and to some approximation of that which supermind already has. In the very process of coming to some approximation, it has to struggle. It has to make efforts, which efforts are partial, failed, which are always insufficient or simply plain wrong, and it needs to begin again and again. It is like a blind man picking up pieces of a puzzle and trying to fit them together, unable to see the full picture. Whereas the one who sees the picture already has the solution to the puzzle in seeing the picture. The pieces then are only playthings which you arrange this way or that. The picture is already known beforehand. But to the mind, we do not even know where we are going. And yet we are urged to go somewhere. We sense dimly, but we never know truly. So this difference of starting point leads to all other differences. So first he says, the supreme cognitive principle does not think by the mind. It thinks by a different way. We do not use the word thinking anymore there because it has the knowledge already. And yet it is a cognitive principle. It is a means of knowing, just as mind is a means of knowing. When the two are put in relation, therefore, we see mind is to it an inferior and secondary action, not its own proper mode. In other words, supermind is able to articulate by the means of mind, but mind is unable to articulate by the means of supermind. Because if supermind chooses to limit itself and reduce itself and dull itself, densify itself, then it becomes like mind. In fact, then it becomes mind. Mind is formed by it, by a process of self-limitation. How it forms it is what he describes next. For mind, based on limitation and division, can act only from a given center in the lower and obscured existence. But supermind is founded on unity and it comprehends and pervades. Its action is in the universal. Now this is the first big difference. In the lower, what is happening with the mind? It is based on limitation and division and acts from a given center in the lower and obscured existence. Supermind is seeing from above the whole in a unity. In that unity, it can therefore focus on a point and another point and another point and another point infinitely. An infinity of infinitesimal points. This is not very difficult for us to appreciate. In your mind, you can, for example, visualize the continuity of empty space. But you can focus on a point, and here's a point, another point, isn't it? You can focus in mind on this point because the point exists. It exists because supermind already conceived of it. Therefore, we can conceive of it. But our mind is fixed on a point. It is looking out from this point that I call I and looking out upon the world. And therefore, all other points are to it other than itself. It sees world as made up of points, infinite. Itself is a point looking upon all other points, except that this point that it is can never truly know another point. Because in order to know it, it must become that point. And in the act of becoming that point, it ceases to be this point. And so this point can never know that point. It can know a representation of that point, which is an approximation. This is the reason why two people can never come to an exact agreement, because each one represents a different point in the continuum of consciousness. And so, although we may come to many points of agreement, there will always be something where we will disagree, because we live in mind consciousness, which knows only points by separation. Now, replace this by supermind, which sees and knows the whole thing as itself one continuum of unity. This point or that point, no, they are just aspects of my unity. This mind or that mind, they are just special focal points of my unity and unitive vision. And therefore, in supermind, you can always come into agreement. Not only you can, you are always in agreement with everything, because you see the truth of that thing from its perspective. But you also see that thing in the larger context of a larger truth of the whole. And from there, the transcendent. Therefore, the supermind can bring harmony between any two conflicting views, because it knows the truth of both. It knows them in right relation with between each other and with the whole around. And so it can bring harmony, because it is one with all and greater than them. But also, it never experiences opposition. Anything you throw at the supermind as an opposition is only an aspect of itself in the totality of the all. And so you may attack the supermind, you may oppose it, you may question it, you may doubt it. The very argument you throw at it, against it, it will see as supporting to it, because it's a part of itself in its unity, and will use that argument to justify itself and reveal itself. Anything that opposes the realization and manifestation of the supermind is therefore used by the supermind to further its own manifestation and to fulfill itself. It is amazing. Therefore, Sri Aurobindo also says, in the very nature of things, the supramental manifestation is inevitable. Nothing can oppose it, nothing can resist it, because all is only known to it as aspects of itself. It's only a question of time, means, process perhaps of organizing its means of expression. If it pushes too rapidly, its unity will overwhelm the fragmented smallness of the human mind, and by overwhelming may shatter and break what is still too fragile to be able to receive it. And therefore, in its freedom, it can choose to withhold itself and allow a gradual process of molding the mind, preparing humanity for its full expression and organizing its means meanwhile. But it can at any point overwhelm, if it so chooses, or cancel or neutralize anything which is about to destroy or harm the present evolutionary process. It is for this reason that the bringing down of the supramental consciousness was so critical for human evolution. Once human mind comes into its own free powers, develops and discovers the means of nature's powers, including and especially the atomic powers, it is only a question of time before the intellect, entering in conflict with other intellects, will use now its greatened powers to destroy the other, and in the process destroy itself. In the history of the universe, so many civilizations on so many planets have thus destroyed themselves. And it was a question of time, even a question touch and go, how close we were to destroying ourselves. And the urgency, therefore, for the supramental manifestation to be brought upon earth, that it could prevent not only a great disaster, but give to the whole evolution a new turn towards the higher possibility. That being done, the mother said, now it is only a question of time and a question of the means and the process. The outcome is inevitable. And she said, Because of the supramental manifestation now, there will no more be a third world war. They used to say, soon after the atom bomb was developed, they said the third world war will be with atom bombs, the fourth world war will be with sticks and stones, because we will have gone back to our primitive life. But there will be no third world war. She said there will be local conflagrations, local battles, but never a third world war, because this principle is active. She said also many things about the change in the human consciousness, the change even on the physical level in the human body, in the weather patterns. Maybe briefly to touch upon them, since we are in the week of the mother's birthday and the supramental manifestations anniversary. She spoke of how, when she was asked, what will be the evidence of the supramental action in matter? She spoke of two things: in the material consciousness, in the mind, many things, of course, but in the material consciousness, first, she said, a change in weather patterns, that the extremes would become less. In other words, the coldest places would become warmer and the hottest places would become cooler. And as you know, she has also spoken of snow in Oroville. Once the lake around Matrimandir is dug up and the artificial hill created, which is due in the next few years. But also, she said the second effect in matter will be the change in the human body. The human body not only will become enormously more plastic, she said in 200 years or so, she said, it will be so much more plastic that we cannot even imagine today. But the form will change to become more androgynous. The distinction between men and women in form will become less. And this will be seen first among gymnasts and athletes who are training the body consciousness. And this today is so obvious when you watch these gymnasts in the Olympics. You cannot make out if it's a man or a woman. The form has become so androgynous. And this points to a certain line of evolution where the human narrowness of types are being as if dissolved and becoming more and more universal. Each culture, each human type may still retain an emphasis of its base, but will open out into a kind of a universality. Mind itself and the emotions would become far more plastic, and so on. And all of these are already in motion by the continued pressure of the supramental consciousness. Mind, based on limitation and division, can act only from a given center in the lower and obscured existence. But supermind is founded on unity, and it comprehends and pervades. The word comprehend comes from complete prehend, prawn, holding together, taking in. It is literally the embracing of and taking in. So comprehends, supermind takes in by embrace the whole, unites, itself based in unity. It comprehends and pervades. It is everywhere because it is everything in the unity of all things. Its action is in the universal and is in conscious communion with a transcendent source, eternal and beyond the formations of the universe. And therefore it is able to link the highest transcendent with the universal and the individual and bring alignment and therefore spontaneous and perfect harmony in its action and in its expression. The rest we will explore next time. But this is the base on which we will pause and briefly meditate on this which we have read for a few minutes.